Groupthink and its pernicious impact within a political context in the Me Too era. Today we're exploring the question, are there consistent individual characteristics that differentiate the conservative from the liberal, and how is groupthink influenced by these characteristics? Specifically, what part does emotional intelligence play in the groupthink phenomenon? Now, before we dig into the impacts of groupthink within a political context, let's define its characteristics. Janice offered groupthink occurs when a committed member of a cohesive in-group and the group's members actively pursue a universal agreement and sense of belonging that creates an environment that prevents a realistic appraisal of a given situation as it relates to the group's perspective. So let's unpack this a bit. Janice provided 8 symptoms of groupthink that really capture its destructive forces. They include invulnerability, rationalization, a guiding group morality, stereotyped views of others, pressure on dissenters, self-censorship, illusion of unanimity, and mind guarding. Moorhead, Ference, and Neck acknowledge that in response to an outsider who might challenge the position of the group or any of its members, the members will justify their position by discounting any contrary information and will assert their relative superior morality while ignoring the real ethical or moral consequences of their positions. Brewer explains that within a political context of in-groups and out-groups, group leaders deliberately manipulate their group members by using various means to mobilize collective action in an effort to secure or maintain power. So, what is it that binds these group members to each other? Paskovich and his team explain that it's a type of group cohesion that becomes a liability in that it applies pressure to conform to group dynamics, thus increasing the potential for groupthink and de-individuation. And the de-individuation is a really important point because it is here where the freedom to analyze, to think rationally, to ask questions that may threaten group ideology or its positions is really at risk. The more invested one becomes in the group as an entity, the more they chip away at their individual existence, and the more likely they are to follow the group's leader. This can create a conflict between one's personal beliefs and attitudes and their actions, known as cognitive dissonance. Now, to remedy this conflict, the group member will reject evidence that supported their past beliefs and accept the group's position to support the group's beliefs, the group's attitudes, and the group's behaviors that are now their own. In fact, Festinger found that when one adopts a strong political identity that may at times differ from what they believe is true, they are more likely to change their beliefs in an effort to bring them more in line with their active allegiance to their political party. They betray their truth for their political group's truth. Now, Berthel and Insko found that high social cohesion within a group contributed more to a groupthink dynamic than did high task cohesion. And this can be seen in a shared political ideology that provides a high social cohesion amongst its group members. Some members may be more active in terms of tasks. They may organize rallies or protests or write letters to editors, while others may simply share the same ideology. But it's this shared ideology that offers a social glue that by its very nature creates a high social cohesion within the group. Now, let's take a look at what happens to dissenters within a polarized power environment. Remember Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment? The prisoners who rebelled against the guards were humiliated. They faced punishment that included imitating sexual acts, cleaning toilets, and they were even forced into solitary confinement conditions. This isn't much different from what authoritarian governments do to discourage dissent from the outgroups. Now, Chenoweth explains that these authoritarian governments use tactics that reinforce elite loyalty, suppress or undermine movements, and reinforce support among the public and other observers. See Appendix A at the end of this presentation for specific examples of these points. Now, these authoritarian tactics often involve some sort of propaganda. And Joette and O'Donnell define propaganda as a deliberate, systematic attempt to shape perceptions, manipulate cognitions, and direct behavior to achieve a response that furthers the desired intent of the propagandist. In such effective propaganda relies on emotion, not reason as a tool for persuading the masses. So, what drives groupthink, political belongingness, and identity? For the sake of consistency, we will use the term conservative to refer to the various factions of the Republican Party and the term liberal for the various factions of the Democratic Party. As we look at the drivers of group political party affiliation, we can see some consistent individual characteristics of the respective group members. Joss and his team of researchers conducted a meta-analysis of the personal traits of the conservative and liberal. One consistent finding involved the conservatives' resistance to social change in what Joss and team referred to as uncertainty avoidance. Specifically, the tendency for the conservative to reject social change because such change threatens their perception of their hierarchical social status. They also found that conservatives have a greater preference for authority and obedience than do liberals, and this preference can be linked to using fear as a political tool. Additional characteristics commonly associated with conservative political views include fear and aggression, dogmatism and intolerance of ambiguity, need for cognitive closure, personal need for structure, terror management, group-based dominance, and system justification. So it's not hard to see the correlation between the characteristics of groupthink and the conservatives' personal characteristics that drive them to group settings. This ties into a particular type of leadership style that is more authoritarian than democratic or collective. Gilstein, Wright, and Stone found that the authoritarian leadership style is appealing because it conducts group interaction via a directed leader group setting versus a non-directed leader group setting. Consistent with the just mentioned personal characteristics, the conservative group member is more willing to conform to the status quo and prefer structure and long-standing traditions or institutions than the liberal. Joss and his team also found that the fear of loss is a commonality between the advantaged conservative and the disadvantaged conservative. The disadvantaged conservative hold on to their conservative ideology to reduce fear and anxiety and to lessen cognitive dissonance, uncertainty, and instability, while the advantaged conservative cling to their ideology out of self-interest and social dominance. In an effort to stem or prevent the consequences that come with loss, this fear of loss or threat to personal security compels conservatives to behave punitively toward one who may be perceived as a social scapegoat. For example, how Dr. Ford was treated by conservatives during the Kavanaugh hearings. So let's take this to the next logical step, fear and aggression. Brown, Osterman, and Barnes found that fear breeds aggression, which is a significant contributor to the culture of honor mindset. This culture of honor encourages aggressive retaliation when one perceives their family, reputation, or property are at risk. Piezinski and team found that those who strongly identify with their group, specifically when reminded of their mortality, are more likely to embrace violence against the outgroup. And Schimmel and team found that fear of death strengthens stereotyping behavior against women and other minorities. Interestingly, Greenberg and team found that the threat of death strengthened political tolerance among liberals. So it comes as no surprise then, as Sidanius and Prado found that conservatives are more likely to actively support inequality in their pursuit for security and dominance that protects their personal hierarchical status. Historically, conservatives had used fear-inducing propaganda to draw up mass hysteria in their opposition to equal rights for various social groups, including women's rights, civil rights, LGBT rights, and immigrant rights for those seeking a better life or safe harbor. In fact, in recent years, we've seen Fox News dominate as the conservative news source, as well as the often claimed assertion of fake news and the use of Twitter to spread mistruths that feed a consistently false narrative that exploits the conservatives' fears. Just consider the Make America Great Again slogan, to grasp the power of propaganda that exploits the romanticized idea of an America that once was and the fear of what America has or may become once the others have some control. Crabtree, Davenport, and others explain the current war on facts, science, journalism, and the misinformation and false statements by public officials are not just about access to information, they are about the power to name and control the perception of reality. Clearly, this use of propaganda furthers the desired attempt of the propagandist. Remember Stanley Milgram's authority and obedience electrocution study that demonstrated how authority can be used to break down someone's will and push them to do something evil despite their being good-natured? If conservatives are more likely to follow the lead of an authoritarian, is it unreasonable to suggest they are more likely than a liberal to do something as sinister as to electrocute someone for mildly abhorrent behavior at the urging of their leader, despite being a good-natured person? Considering the evidence provided and the growing spate of mass shootings by angry white men who are faithful followers of extreme right-wing ideologies, it would not surprise me. Now, let's consider the personal characteristics of the liberal. Gilstein, Wright, and Stone found liberals were more likely to possess greater social presence, psychological mindedness, and flexibility that relates to an individual's social behavior, spontaneity, and self-confidence in social situations, and in his responsiveness to others. They are one who favors reform and is open-minded to ideas that challenge tradition. So it's no surprise then that liberals prefer a non-directed leader group setting that encourages more open discussion and options to participate, as well as reduced structure and greater group resilience to problem solve. Additionally, Peterson and Lane found that non-conservatives are more open to new and exciting experiences. Liberals have historically supported women's rights, including their right to vote, reproductive choice, equal pay, and efforts to end violence against women. And they've supported civil rights for Black Americans, LGBT equal rights, and more relaxed avenues for immigrants to obtain citizenship. But liberals also fall prey to propaganda that exploits emotion, including the Me Too and Resist hashtags and President Obama's Hope campaign slogan that inspired people to believe in a better future. We've also seen MSNBC become the dominating news network for the more adamant liberal. The difference is, however, the liberal's perspective is typically inclusive, while the conservative's is often exclusive. It would be irresponsible to draw an equivalency between the two given the evidence. So, what might contribute to such extraordinary differences between the conservative and liberal? Schreiber and team found differing brain activity of the self-described conservative and liberal when presented with risk-taking stimuli. The neurological responses of conservatives included more activity in the right amygdala than the liberals. Now, this area facilitates the orientation of attention to external cues. Liberals had greater left posterior insular activity that aids in perception and related internal physiological states than did conservatives. Now, these findings indicate conservatives are more likely to get keyed up by external factors that are perceived as a threat to their well-being than liberals, who, under identical circumstances, are more likely to use analysis and a greater dispositional awareness. Researchers believe these neurological reactions can be changed due to the brain's ability to learn new things and create new pathways in response to stimuli. Another contributing factor to these group differences involve levels of emotional intelligence. Davies, Stankoff, and Roberts identified 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence, including appraisal and expression of emotion in oneself, appraisal and recognition of emotion in others, regulation of emotions in oneself, and use of emotions to facilitate performance. If we know that fear of loss can drive people to harm others, to protect what is theirs, to shed their individuality for the group's identity, to prefer an authoritarian leader over one who works in the best interest of the majority, then we can reasonably infer that the ability to recognize, consider, and respond appropriately to emotions of others is likely diminished. So let's now provide context to our findings. Let's consider the current makeup of both political parties. This graph represents total U.S. registered voters. Independents are not included. 51% of whites are Republican, while only 8% of blacks, 28% of Latinos, and 27% of Asians are Republican. 48% of Republican voters are men, and 37% are women, and only 36% are college graduates with a bachelor's degree or higher. You'll also notice that 43% of whites, 84% of blacks, 63% of Latinos, and 65% of Asians are Democrats. 44% are men, 56% are women, and 58% are college graduates with a bachelor's degree or higher. As of 2017, women held 19.6% of congressional offices, 23.7% of statewide elective office, and 25.1% of state legislative office. Although these numbers have increased somewhat since the 2018 midterm elections, women are still underrepresented in political office. Is it any wonder then that women continue to face opposition and discrimination throughout their many roles in society? Additionally, is it any wonder that women continue to be victims of sexual violence at the hands of powerful men? The Me Too movement officially gained traction on October 5, 2017, when Harvey Weinstein's history of sexual harassment hit the New York Times cover page. The New York Times reports in its first year, the Me Too movement has brought down 201 powerful men, and nearly half of the replacements are women. And by March of 2018, 575 women were running for U.S. House, U.S. Senate, or for governor's offices. More women than ever before. In early October 2018, a Public Religion Research Institute poll was conducted. 538 reported that 61% of Republican men and 48% of Republican women said they would consider voting for a political candidate who was facing multiple accusations of sexual misconduct. But only 19% of Democratic men and 14% of Democratic women said they would consider voting for the same candidate. The same poll found 31% of Republicans think politics would be improved if more women served in office, while 80% of Democrats felt the same way. So clearly the Me Too movement is more about liberal women than every woman, but since Trump took office, the burgeoning of the Me Too movement, there has been an uptick of conservative women changing parties. A recent article from The Atlantic summarized a September USC LA Times survey that was conducted before the Kavanaugh hearings and sexual allegations took place. It found that as of midsummer, the Democrats saw an increase of 8 points among white married women, 9 points for white suburban women, and 10 points for white non-college women. Similarly, a cooperative congressional election study found in the recent 2018 midterms, 60% of women who voted for Democrats. That's a 7.5% increase from the 2016 election. And 3% of white women without a college degree and 15% of white college-educated women shifted toward Democrat. The same poll found that in the 2018 election, sexist statements were the greatest factor in this shift. The report found that people who were more likely to disagree with sexist statements were much less likely to vote Republican. And over the last 2 years, women have often been the public target of sexist, hostile remarks from men in power, forcing faithful conservative women to reevaluate their political group identity. So, is this shift in party affiliation and the influence of the Me Too movement generating an existential crisis of sorts that is beginning to break the binds of conservative groupthink? I propose we are seeing an increase in the collective emotional intelligence of conservative women to support powerful institutions that embrace equality. Now, how do we grow this shift beyond women and develop a mass public embrace for doing good to inspire more good and grow emotional intelligence? Researchers Gillard Corby and team created a 7-week, 6-point curriculum to develop emotional intelligence skills. The curriculum focused on intrapersonal and self-perception areas, interpersonal emotional intelligence, adaptability and decision-making, general mood and self-expression, stress management and optimism, and finally, emotional understanding and emotional management. This approach, coupled with teaching people how to be a hero, as Dr. Zimbardo discussed in his 2008 TED Talk, could be a productive step forward. He recommended shifting our focus from the who to the what, or what he refers to as from the dispositional to the situational. He suggested consider not what's inside this individual, but what is the situation? What are the external factors that lead to such distinct differences? He posits that powerful institutions are responsible for creating and perpetuating a system of evil that pits seemingly good people against each other in an evil pursuit of dominance. If we change the institutions through educating and inspiring people to be heroes, our social institutions will follow. He offers that heroism is the counterpoint to evil, and that we should teach kids to use their supernatural talents, to act sociocentrically, not egocentrically. In fact, Dr. Zimbardo created the Heroic Imagination Project that offers workshops to educate participants about their own psychology, to act in ways that are kind, pro-social, and even heroic. To create such changes that steer us away from the liabilities of groupthink and toward a higher level of awareness, Moorhead and team recommended that leaders need to create environments that allow for an open exchange of ideas, that challenge the status quo, and to encourage dissent aimed at problem solving while remaining open and unbiased as to their preferred direction. In closing, high individual emotional intelligence compels us to behave as a socially responsible member of society who is open to new ideas, accepting of individual differences, and committed to doing the most good for the most number of people while doing the least amount of harm to the least of those among us. Thank you.